Good afternoon, or I guess it's almost evening. We're back again to provide you an update on the latest things that are happening around schools in Kansas. I'm Brian Jordan, Deputy Director here at KASB.
And I'm Angie Stallbaumer, Assistant Executive Director for Legal Services at KASB.
So yesterday when we got together, the news had just broke of the governor closing schools until the end of the school year. I wanted to provide a little bit more clarification on what that means. That means that schools are closed in the traditional sense until the end of May, but that does not mean that students shouldn't be accessing different forms of learning from now until the end of May. That school closure was done in part so that there could be some exemptions given to contact hours for students. That's in the law. So we're here tonight to provide some updates on things that have happened since last night, but also try to address some questions that have been asked over the last 24 hours related to boards of education and functions within the school. So I think the first thing that we're getting a lot of questions about came up today in the superintendent meeting is where are we at with COMA and how that plays into boards assembling with the guidelines that we know are out there around no more than 10 people in a given space. So, Angie?
Sure. So we have checked with the Kansas Attorney General's office. The temporary regulations that they're putting together have been drafted, but they have not been approved. So we will keep you updated on that issue as information becomes available, and we'll stay into contact with them to see if there's anything more they can share with us. At this point, based on the guidance that we've been given, we believe that it's still best practice to maintain some physical location where individuals can come and observe what is happening. Now, that may mean that all of your board members are participating via Zoom. I think everyone anticipates that may be an option or a need, actually, if we're going to have that many people in a room. So if they want to do that, that's fine, but we probably need to look at still maintaining a physical location where individuals can come watch the board interact.
Yeah, I think a couple of reminders, and this is something we share with boards consistently, is a reminder that it is the board's meeting in public, not a public meeting for the public. So that's something that you have to kind of think about as whatever method that you settle on to provide that access for the public to see your meeting. That's the key, is they need to be able to see the board or hear the board conducting their public meeting. So a couple other things that we wanted to try to provide some clarity around is kind of the timeline going forward. We heard the governor talk about, schools are closed till the end of the school year, but there's some timelines that superintendents have heard consistently from the State Department of Education. This week, the schools should be closed completely except for staff that are in those buildings doing a deep cleaning on those facilities. This does not mean that you can't start to correspond with staff via technology. That there has been no forced closure of the district office facilities in communities. Keep in mind that if you're going to bring staff together physically, you still need to comply with the guidance that's out there around no more than 10 people coming together, trying to maintain 6-foot space between those people. We ask you to continue to check those guidelines. They could be changing or evolving each day. But if you're going to bring staff together this week to start some of that planning conversation, it can't happen in the physical school building. Could happen in your district office, possibly meet the guidelines if you're going to do that. But for sure, you could start meeting with those folks via technology. So think Zoom, think Google Planning or Google Classroom, those types of things. Next week, the week beginning with March 23rd, you really need to think about how you want to start to work with staff to plan what this continuous learning is going to look like. We know happening next week, things happening next week, there should be some guidelines towards the end of the week that come out related to the waiver that each district is going to need to provide to the Kansas State Department of Education. In that waiver, you need to outline your plans for continuous learning. Those plans need to take into account some of the guidance that's being put together by the Strategic Task Force that is working with KSD as we speak. I can't emphasize enough, as you bring the staff together to start to do that planning work, you need to be in compliance with KDHE. We got some word today that there were some blanket emails sent out that, hey, all staff needs to come in and we need to start working on this. That's not going to be a proper way to bring those folks together. You need to comply with the guidelines that are out there. So next week is the planning time.
Oh no, I was just going to say we're hearing that local health departments too still have different approaches to this too. So just because KDHE or the CDC or the White House may have guidelines, your local health department may have stricter guidelines based on the level of outbreak that your county may be experiencing. So be sure to check in with your local health department before
That's a great
you bring
point.
people in.
Yeah, you'll want to make sure you're sharing those continuous learning plans and options with that local health department to make sure that you're in compliance with your local expectations. So this next week, the planning sessions, you need to think about in this next week, also trying to find some time towards the end of the week to call that special board meeting. You're going to want the board to be able to say, yes, we've looked at this continuous learning plan, we're approving the waiver, and before that gets sent up to the State Department of Education, we think that's a key step from a communication standpoint and making sure that all parties are kind of understanding what it's going to look like as you start to deliver that continuous learning plan. So then you get to the week of March 30th. This would be the week that we start to see some of the continuous learning opportunities that have been defined by your leadership teams that are working. They start to go into place. Here again, you need to comply with the KDHE guidelines, your local health department guidelines, as you provide those opportunities. I'll also throw in here a reminder, we've heard over the last few days that the task force, the continuous learning task force at the State Department is looking at providing guidance across multiple ways to deliver support for kids, and that includes online, that includes instructional packets or support packets. That also could include possibly some small groups of students, provided it's less than 10 and meets those guidelines that your local health department has put out there. So that's kind of what the next few weeks look like with where we're at. Again, these things all are evolving every day. There's multiple groups meeting every day. We're meeting daily with the KNEA, USA, KSSA, KSDE, trying to keep everybody informed. You all back home in your districts also need to think about how are we communicating what we're going to try to accomplish over these next few weeks. I think that's going to be one of the challenges that districts have, is how do we make sure that we're getting timely and accurate communication out there for our parents, for our staff, so that people are kind of understanding what's coming next.
Absolutely.
Angie, give us a little, next thing on our list here is to talk about some work KSD is looking into.
So KSDE will be having a meeting with rural internet providers tomorrow morning, and what they're looking into is options with regard to maybe putting hotspots in places that don't have access right now, possibly looking at lowering costs for individuals that want to really ramp up their internet connectivity and speeds for this time period. So we're also hearing more about offerings from Zoom and other entities that are making things available to allow us to continue to work. So that's going on. We talked about a special board meeting, and
I want to add one thing on that
absolutely.
rural internet. We've heard from a couple of districts. They're being very intentional about trying to figure out where their needs are from an internet access standpoint. So that'll be something that you need to be thinking about. Where are the greatest areas of need? How do we get that information for folks? I know some districts have had making personal phone calls to families, trying to figure out where those greatest areas of needs are. So,
and I've heard some of our districts surveyed parents earlier and had that information on whether or not they have access at home. So it might be time to pull out some of those enrollment records and check back into that situation. Maybe you have some of that data available to you. So we mentioned yesterday that the board needs to get together and meet. And when we were listening to the message that KSDE was giving to superintendents today, they really reinforced the need for the board to get together, because there are some major decisions that are going to have to be made. Obviously, your district leadership is going to get together, and they're going to involve staff members in putting together these plans for continuous learning. But KSDE is recommending that the board does okay that plan. The plan that eventually goes in as part of the waiver really should have board approval. They're also recommending that the board essentially signs off on any inclusion of staff into that school building setting. So that's another piece they want the board to take some action on. You may need to look at your graduation requirements. As we look at supporting this year's seniors, the state minimum is 21 hours. So this might be a time where if you have hours greater than that and you don't feel that you're going to be able to work out those kinks, that the board needs to take action on possibly suspending those requirements or figuring out how to work with that.
So something in that area specifically around graduation, we've heard a lot of discussion around looking at what competencies we're going to need students to accomplish. We're going to have to shift away from time spent in a classroom to competencies achieved or obtained for a student in certain courses. We're not expecting the board to define what those look like, but we are expecting the board to talk about what that could look like, and your leadership team along with your teacher leaders are the folks that are going to define what those competencies could look like or what those graduation pieces could look like. Just understand it's going to have to look different than what we've traditionally done, obviously.
And we do know, we knew pretty much yesterday when legislation went through, but KSDE confirmed for us today that a part of the waiver process is going to be letting them know that you are continuing to pay hourly staff with the funding that you've received. So that really takes the decision out of the board's hands, but they still want, if your leave policies don't allow for you to do that without board action, it's still a good idea to pass a resolution. KASB Legal will be working on language. So we will try to make some forms available for you all so that we're sure that you've got the tools in your basket to be able to take action when you meet next week.
Yes. So a couple other items here for consideration or things to think about. All of our communities, all of our schools have students that have social emotional needs and had been receiving services throughout the school year. We've got word from districts that have directed or supported counselors and social workers to go ahead and reach out to those students. Obviously, you wouldn't assemble a group of 10 or more of those students in one location due to the guidelines that are out there, but it is perfectly appropriate to have your counselors, social workers reaching out to those students, a phone call, a FaceTime, some interaction with those students to make sure that they're feeling supported and getting some of the services that they need in these times of uncertainty. And I'm sure the anxiety level is high with students as well as it is with the families of those students. So that's something that we've heard some districts being very proactive in trying to make sure that support continues. Let's transition here at the end into some of the questions that we've received over the last few days of how to handle certain situations. So paying of supplemental contracts for your certified staff members. Angie, what's some good advice there?
Well, they're on contract right now. So from a legal standpoint, you'd be looking at either terminating those contracts or taking resignations. But I'll tell you, KSDE has been pretty open that they believe we go ahead and pay out those any contractual obligations that we have for staff members at this point. So at this point, where you have to include that information in the waiver, that is probably just the way to go.
Okay.
We also have information, and KSD approved of it today, that if you maintain a licensed child care facility, so we're talking daycares, within your buildings, that those facilities do not have to close. They do not need to close. So
the thinking behind that, the rationale that was given is we need the workers whose kids stay at those facilities. Think healthcare workers, think some of these folks that are carrying out very urgent and tasks that are what they call essential in communities. And so those child care facilities that are licensed by KDHE in a school building do not have to close, was the message today. Kind of a final piece here, just an update. We've talked a lot about the continuous learning task force that was assembled by the Kansas State Department of Education. We are expecting to have that guidance come out from that task force later this evening. The way that that information will be rolled out is through the superintendent's listserv, the curriculum director's listserv, and principal listservs that are out there. The State Department is going to take that information, review it, and then push it out through those different avenues. That information will eventually end up on the Kansas State Department of Education website, and the public will be able to access that information. But initially they wanted those different groups to have that information so they could begin to look at it, start to have some conversation with their teacher teams or their teams within their district, so that those folks kind of know what they're trying to plan around as they put that continuous learning plan together.
And they have been very clear that it is a vast amount of information that this task force has put together. So, you know, at content level, age level, specific information. So it's going to be a pretty large document when it's made available, but it should give really good guidance in moving forward.
So we're going to try to wrap things up here. We're trying to provide you up-to-date, timely information. Tomorrow, we're planning to do this again based on the information that we've gathered and collected over the course of the day. There will be a little bit different place to go to access the information tomorrow. You'll need to go to our website to access that information and log into the member portal to pull that information up. But we'll try to keep you up to date. We're always here to support your districts and your boards with any questions that you have. We know it's uncertain times, but we also know we kind of have an opportunity in front of us here as we look at how do we do some things differently and possibly better with our services and supports that we provide for kids in Kansas. So thank you for logging in or watching us this afternoon, and we'll visit with you tomorrow.
Great, thank you.